You won't believe how excited I was while making this video. So, you've probably all heard about the biggest development in the gaming world lately. The rumors about the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered turned out to be true. Bethesda announced the game and then, just 10 minutes later, made it available to players. And guess what? I moved fast, got my hands on it, and now, through Oblivion Remastered, I finally get to tell you all about the Oblivion Crisis, something I've always wanted to explain but couldn't do justice to because of the old graphics. Before diving into what the Oblivion Crisis is and how it changed Tamriel, I'd like to share a few thoughts about the remaster. First off, I have to give Bethesda a huge round of applause. Bringing back a 20-year-old game, one that's just as important to the series as any other, and giving it a modern makeover for today's players is such a great move. I know a lot of people who fell in love with the Elder Scrolls universe through Skyrim, who read up on the lore and got really into it, but could never play Oblivion or Morrowind because of the outdated graphics and clunky engine, even though they really wanted to. That's why this remaster is such a win. It'll make longtime fans happy and pull in new players. And releasing Oblivion Remastered before the Elder Scrolls 6? Genius! It'll give newcomers a deeper understanding of the lore before the next big installment. Now, here's hoping we get a Morrowind remaster in the next few years. Because honestly, that would make me even happier than Oblivion. I've always had a soft spot for Morrowind's melancholic atmosphere. I have to say, I'm absolutely blown away by Oblivion's visual upgrade. Bethesda really knocked it out of the park with this one. Instead of diving into technical details, I'd rather just show you the improvements in this video, because you'll get to experience them firsthand. One thing I really loved is the smarter enemy AI. They don't just mindlessly swing at you anymore. If you raise your guard, they actually react, making fights way more dynamic and immersive. And let's not forget all the other upgrades. Better equipment mechanics, DLSS support, and a ton of other tweaks. Even the HUD, which I always complained about and fixed with mods, finally got a sleek, modern makeover. Honestly, this isn't just the same game we played years ago with a fresh coat of paint. It's a whole new experience, and every Elder Scrolls fan should check it out. Thanks to this remaster, I finally get to tell all those Elder Scrolls stories I've wanted to share, with visuals that actually do them justice. You'll see more of that in future videos on the channel. Before we jump in, if you enjoy my videos and want to see more Elder Scrolls lore, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what keeps me motivated to create, and I'm so grateful for all your love. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything I cover, so drop your opinions in the comments. Enjoy the video. At the turning of the Fourth Age in the year 3rd Era 433, the Emperor Uriel Septim VII was assassinated and the Amulet of Kings was destroyed. This set in motion a chain of events that would bring down an empire and change forever the relationship between man and the gods. The Imperial historian Praxis Sarcorum sums up the Oblivion Crisis with these words. I love this quote because Oblivion, as a game, dives deeper into Tamriel's religious philosophy than the other titles, and builds its entire story around it. Just as Sarcorum describes, the Oblivion Crisis truly reshaped the relationship between the people of Tamriel and their gods, and that's just one of its 3 major consequences. The other 2? It completely upended the political landscape for every race on the continent and brought about the fall of the greatest empire in Tamriel's history, the Septim Empire. We'll go through all of these in detail later in the video. But first, as we always do, let's take a quick look at the political state of Tamriel right before the Oblivion Crisis hit, because context is everything. Before the crisis, Tamriel's political situation. Right before the Oblivion Crisis erupted in 3rd Era 433, the entirety of Tamriel was ruled by the Septim Dynasty under Emperor Uriel Septim VII. As we all know, this empire was founded by Tiber Septim himself, the first conqueror to unite all of Tamriel at the dawn of the 3rd Era. Under Uriel Septim VII's rule, the empire held together despite minor struggles. Ever since taking the throne, Uriel had pursued bold, sometimes even aggressive policies to maintain this unity, keeping Tamriel's fragile alliance intact through sheer will. Early in his reign, Uriel focused on permanently integrating the eastern provinces, Morrowind and Black Marsh, into the empire. Imperial Legion control was weak in these regions, and local cultures often overshadowed Imperial influence. But Uriel was sharp-witted and daring. Using his cunning mind and diplomatic skill, he won over House Hlalu, establishing a puppet government in Morrowind loyal to the Empire. And who helped him pull this off? The Imperial battle mage, Jagar Tharn. But that alliance? Yeah, it would later become Uriel Septim's biggest regret. Imperial Simulacrum. In 3rd Era 376, just before becoming the Imperial Battle Mage, Jagar Tharn deceived Queen Baranzaya of Mournhold and stole the Staff of Chaos from its hiding place. By 3rd Era 389, he had earned Emperor Uriel Septim's trust as his trusted advisor, only to betray him in the most unexpected moment. Using the staff's power, he banished Uriel Septim into Oblivion. Now, here's something crucial. Normally, when a Tamrielic emperor dies, the Elder Council is magically notified by the Amulet of Kings, and they gather to choose a successor. This amulet isn't just a fancy necklace, it's a sacred relic that only those with Dragonborn blood can wear, serving as the divine seal of the Septim dynasty's legitimacy. And trust me, this little trinket would later become absolutely critical during the Oblivion Crisis. But back to the story. When Uriel was hurled into Oblivion, the amulet didn't trigger the usual alert, because time flows differently in Oblivion. Meanwhile, Tharn shattered the Staff of Chaos into 8 pieces, hiding them across Tamriel. Using his magic, he stole Uriel's face, replaced the Imperial Guard with Daedra, and secretly ruled the Empire from the shadows. Uriel spent an entire decade trapped in Oblivion. A few years later, Tharn made a fateful deal with Mehrunes Dagon, the same Daedric prince who would later become the main antagonist of the Oblivion Crisis, to crush his remaining opposition. But Mehrunes Dagon's attempts to meddle in Tamriel were thwarted by a mysterious hero who banished him back to Oblivion. This decade-long nightmare finally ended when a legendary warrior known as the Eternal Champion recovered the fragments of the Staff of Chaos, slew Jagar Tharn, and freed Uriel Septim. Hardcore Elder Scrolls fans probably recognize this as the plot of the Elder Scrolls Arena, the game that introduced us to this incredible universe and let us first set foot in Tamriel. When Emperor Uriel returned, he remembered nothing of his time in Oblivion, only that he was haunted by endless nightmares, both waking and sleeping. The once young, ambitious, and energetic ruler came back a changed man. He grew cautious, pessimistic, and abandoned his bold policies. During his absence, the Empire's economy had crumbled, governance had weakened, and minor lords across Tamriel began openly defying Imperial authority, something Tharn had ignored. Instead of confronting these challenges head-on, Uriel took a subtler approach. He empowered the Blades, the Emperor's elite protectors, granting them expanded authority to act as spies and enforcers, quietly reinforcing Imperial control from the shadows. Miraculously, he managed to undo some of Tharn's damage, restoring order in Hammerfell and Morrowind and slowly rebuilding the Empire's strength, though it would never be quite the same again. As the timeline approached the Oblivion Crisis, the Septim Empire entered a period of relative peace and prosperity, much like the early years of Uriel's reign. True, tension simmered. Elven supremacists in the Somerset Isles, who would later form the Thalmor, grew louder, and there were murmurs of rebellion in Valenwood and elsewhere, weakening Imperial influence. But none of it yet demanded full-scale intervention. With stability restored, the Empire turned its focus to a long-standing ambition, fully bringing Morrowind under Imperial control. The peace seemed like the perfect opportunity, until Uriel's nightmares returned. Visions of an approaching doom, too blurred between dream and reality to dismiss. A threat was looming, one he could no longer escape. And what a threat it would be. The coming storm would unleash one of the most devastating invasions in Tamriel's history, its scars permanent, its memory never fading. The gates of Oblivion were about to swing open, and nothing would ever be the same. Mehrunes Dagon's plan and the beginning of the Oblivion Crisis. If I had to pick one name to describe Mehrunes Dagon, who goes by many titles, I'd call him the Daedric Prince of Darkness and Destruction. He has an insatiable hunger for ruin and chaos, but this destruction isn't mindless. It's believed to be a tool for radical change and violent rebellion. His greatest enemy? Akatosh, the chief deity of the Nine Divines and the most well-known god in Tamriel. Since the First Era, Mehrunes Dagon has tried to invade Tamriel for reasons that aren't entirely clear. Some of his cultists claim he believes Tamriel rightfully belongs to him as his own plane of oblivion, but the truth behind this is murky at best. That's why I can't give you a definitive reason for his countless invasion attempts. The most famous of these? The event later known as the Oblivion Crisis. In the final years of Tamriel's Third Era, an Altmer sorcerer named Mankar Camoran, founder of the Daedric cult Mythic Dawn, learned that Mehrunes Dagon planned to invade Mundus, the plane where Tamriel exists. But for Dagon to cross over from Oblivion, the magical barriers keeping the realms separate had to be removed. The Mythic Dawn's core belief was that Mundus itself was actually a plane of Oblivion, ruled by the Daedric prince Lorkhan. They believed the world had been tricked by lies and illusions into being ruled by the Aedra, and that Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Hope and Change, would free them. To them, Dagon was a savior who would grant them eternal paradise. Now you might be wondering, What's the source of the barrier between Oblivion and Mundus? That barrier only exists as long as a septim sits on the Cyrodiilic throne and the dragon fires remain lit. Under those conditions, passage between the two realms is impossible. And since the Septim dynasty had endured since Tiber Septim, there had never been an opportunity for an invasion, until Mankar Camoran figured it out. He devised a plan to kill the Emperor and all his heirs. His first move? Extinguishing the dragon fires which had burned for centuries, an unprecedented act. Meanwhile, the fanatical members of the Mythic Dawn stirred up chaos across Tamriel, paving the way for Dagon's arrival. The Mythic Dawn's grand plan was to launch an attack against the royal family. Emperor Uriel Septim's 3 heirs were assassinated before they could even be protected. In the capital city of Cyrodiil, concerns grew over the Emperor's safety, and security measures were drastically increased. The Blades even planned to smuggle Uriel out of the city to hide him. Led by Captain Renault, 3 Blade members and the Emperor moved to escape through a secret passage hidden in one of the prison cells. But as they passed through, they encountered a prisoner, and that's where we come in. That prisoner is us. And so, our Oblivion adventure begins. As he walked by, the Emperor recognized the prisoner and spoke of a great destiny awaiting them. He immediately ordered the prisoner to come with them, and the group entered the secret tunnels. The Emperor and his escort were ambushed multiple times by the Mythic Dawn along the way. Renault was killed in the first attack, leaving Glenroy of the Blades in charge. Eventually, the Mythic Dawn assassins succeeded in trapping them. While the guards fought desperately, Emperor Uriel turned to the prisoner, to us, and handed over the Amulet of Kings. He also told us to find Joffrey, the only one who knew the location of his last heir, Martin Septim. At that moment, Uriel's words made it clear he already knew what was coming. Find him, and close shut the jaws of Oblivion. And with that, Emperor Uriel Septim VII, who had ruled Tamriel for 65 years, was stabbed to death by an assassin. Now, the throne of Cyrodiil had no septim to wear the Amulet of Kings. Mankar Camoran and his cult had completed their first mission. Next came their second task, opening the gates of Oblivion and unleashing Dagon's forces upon Tamriel. Siege of Kvatch. After assassinating the Emperor, the Mythic Dawn moved to the second phase of their plan, opening the gates of Oblivion so Dagon's armies could invade Tamriel. The first gate appeared near Kvatch, a Colovian city in the heart of Cyrodiil's Gold Coast. Kvatch was crucial because Martin Septim, the last heir to the throne, was hiding there. By opening an Oblivion gate here, the Mythic Dawn not only unleashed war between Tamriel's people and the Daedric hordes, but also created an opportunity to kill Martin. The attack came at night, and 3 gates opened across the city. Dagon's Daedric forces swarmed in, but these gates were relatively small. Then, as the invasion raged on, the Mythic Dawn opened a massive gate, one so huge it allowed a siege crawler, a towering Daedric war machine built to burn cities to the ground, to cross into Tamriel. The siege crawler reduced Kvatch to ruins, setting buildings ablaze. By the end, only a handful of survivors remained. Some fled, while others barricaded themselves inside the Chapel of Akatosh. Once the slaughter was over, the Daedric armies withdrew to Oblivion, taking the siege crawler with them. But they left one gate open. Why? To prevent Kvatch's guards from retaking the city. Despite the massacre, Martin Septim survived, taking refuge in the chapel, though it was surrounded by Daedra. That's when the hero of Kvatch, yep, that's us, the player, steps in to rescue him. Here, we learn Martin was living as a priest in Kvatch before we set out to save him. And in doing so, the Kvatch champion achieved something no one else had before, destroying an active Oblivion gate blocking the city's entrance. By entering the Oblivion gate, the hero of Kvatch took the fight into the realm of Oblivion for the first time. Despite facing fierce resistance, they managed to seize the Sigil Stone, the object binding the gate to the mortal world, and destroyed the gate. Returning just as it collapsed, the hero and Kvatch's guards seized the moment to retake the city's castle, handing the Daedric armies their first defeat. This became a beacon of hope for the people of Tamriel. When Mankar Camoran learned of these events, he made Martin Septim's assassination the cult's top priority. He also ordered an attack on Waynon Priory, believing the Amulet of Kings was hidden there. By sheer coincidence, Martin and the hero of Kvatch arrived at the Priory just in time to help repel the assault. After the battle, Martin was placed under the protection of the Blades and taken to their stronghold. In response, the Mythic Dawn escalated their offensive, opening Oblivion gates across all of Tamriel. And just like that, the Oblivion Crisis had begun. The course of the crisis, the struggle of empire and provinces. With Oblivion gates opening across every corner of Tamriel, all races found themselves fighting for survival. This was unlike any war they'd ever seen. The Daedric hordes pouring out of Oblivion were far more savage and merciless than any enemy they'd faced before. Massacres unfolded throughout Tamriel, atrocities that would forever scar the collective memory of its people. But one thing's certain, nearly every race stood their ground against Dagon's forces, even at the cost of their lives. Now, let's take a look at how each province fared during the Oblivion Crisis. The main battleground was the Imperial heartland of Cyrodiil. Here, the city of Kvatch was reduced to ruins, rendered nearly uninhabitable. It remained under occupation for some time, with most of its population slaughtered before the guards finally reclaimed it and attempted to establish a defensive line. Another major blow fell on Bruma, but unlike Kvatch, Bruma managed to repel the Daedric forces, chasing them all the way back into Oblivion. Finally, the Imperial city itself, home to the White Gold Tower, came under siege as countless gates opened around it. Mehrunes Dagon even appeared in person, determined to take the city for himself, but things didn't go as planned. We'll dive deeper into that later in the video. As for the other provinces, while detailed records are scarce, we can piece together the broader picture. Morrowind and Skyrim were hit hardest after Cyrodiil. Reports from Skyrim speak of overwhelming Daedric forces crushing the Nords. If you've played Skyrim, you've likely noticed the many ruined towers dotting the landscape, some of which were destroyed during the Crisis. By the time of the 5th game, these fortresses lie in ruins, now occupied by bandits and vampires rather than Imperial soldiers. Morrowind, home of the Dunmer and the setting of the 3rd game, suffered just as much as Skyrim during the Crisis. But here, the bigger problem wasn't just the Daedric invasion, it was the province's political instability and internal conflicts. During this time, House Hlaalu and House Dress formed an alliance to attack House Indoril, while Skyrim's Nords simultaneously besieged House Redoran territories. Things grew even more chaotic when two of Morrowind's most powerful figures vanished. Vivec, the last living god of the Tribunal, disappeared mysteriously, and the legendary hero the Nerevarine, who we know from Morrowind, left on an expedition to Akavir. The result? House Redoran was crushed in the catastrophic battle known as the Fall of Aldrune, losing its stronghold in the process. According to Redoran, the Empire abandoned the Dunmer by withdrawing all forces from Morrowind to defend Cyrodiil, a claim that likely fueled the later tensions leading to Skyrim's civil war. This detail is crucial. It sowed deep resentment among the Dunmer toward the Empire. But Imperial records tell a different story. The Legion never officially withdrew. Instead, the small garrison left in Morrowind was simply too weak to hold back the Daedra without reinforcements from besieged Cyrodiil. Meanwhile, in Black Marsh, home of the Reptilian Argonians, things played out very differently. And let's be honest, we've never had the full picture of this province since outsiders rarely survive its deadly swamps long enough to report back. The Argonians united under a faction called the Anzilil, and fought back so fiercely that they didn't just defend their borders, they invaded Oblivion itself. Their savage counterattack forced the Daedra to close their own gates in retreat. By the war's end, Black Marsh emerged unscathed, and the Anzilil's influence soared. Soon after, they seceded from the Empire, declaring independence under Anzilil rule. In the Somerset Isles, homeland of the High Elves, the Daedric invasion struck at a time when resentment against the Septim Dynasty and Tiber Septim had already led to a boycott of Imperial goods. Though the Altmer were a proud and resilient race, the Daedric hordes pushed them to their limits. They held out valiantly at their last line of defense, the Crystal Tower, which even became a refuge for fleeing civilians from other provinces. But as the Daedric siege intensified, the Elves' defenses faltered. The tower fell, leading to a brutal massacre of countless Altmer. This catastrophe marked the beginning of the Thalmor's rise to power, setting the stage for future conflicts. As for provinces like High Rock, Elsewhere, Valenwood, and Hammerfell, records of their struggles are scarce. We know Oblivion gates opened there too, and their people surely fought with equal sacrifice to defend their lands. Who knows, maybe the 6th game will take us to Hammerfell, where we'll finally see the scars of the Crisis firsthand. Weakening the Crisis, Camoran is dying. The massive Mythic Dawn assault on Bruma aimed at finding and killing Martin Septim would go down in history as the Second Battle of Bruma. This clash became the largest confrontation against the Daedric forces yet. With the Imperial Legion's support, the hero of Kvatch managed to breach the Great Oblivion Gate and destroy it, crushing the Daedric army in Bruma. The Empire had scored a major victory against Dagon. Meanwhile, Mankar Camoran was hiding in what he called his paradise, a lavish palace realm of his own making. The hero stormed this so-called paradise and faced Camoran in an epic battle. Though Camoran tried to convince the hero that the world is just another plane of Oblivion and that Dagon's invasion was justified, the hero wasn't buying it. After a fierce fight, Camoran fell and his paradise shattered, marking the end of the mythic dawn. But the crisis wasn't over yet. The dragonfires remained unlit, and Mehrunes Dagon still loomed over Tamriel. The defeat of Mehrunes Dagon. Martin Septim had proven himself in battle after battle against the Daedra, earning the respect of Cyrodiil's Imperial Legion. Now, the soldiers cheered for him, their new emperor. After Camoran's fall, Martin and the hero of Kvatch sought out Okado, the High Chancellor who had been ruling as regent. Okado recognized Martin's claim and handed over the Empire's reins. But then came the worst possible news. Oblivion gates had opened inside the Imperial City itself. The war had reached the heart of Tamriel, the White Gold Tower. The capital was burning, and the Empire faced its final hour. Martin and the hero rushed to the Temple of the One, where the dragonfires could be relit to restore the barrier between worlds. But then, the unthinkable happened. Mehrunes Dagon himself crossed into Tamriel, a desperate, catastrophic move that proved the barriers between realms had fully collapsed. A Daedric prince, a god of destruction, now stood on mortal soil. Another emperor might have surrendered to despair, but Martin Septim, forged in the fires of the crisis, had one last gambit. He sent the hero to the dragonfires while he confronted Dagon alone. As Dagon shattered the sacred temple poised to strike the killing blow, Martin shattered the Amulet of Kings. A blinding explosion of light erupted, and from the flames, Martin transformed into an avatar of Akatosh, a colossal, fiery dragon. For the first time in history, an Aedra and Daedra clashed directly on Tamrielic soil. The battle shook the heavens until, at last, Akatosh's avatar overpowered Dagon, hurling him back into oblivion. With his defeat, every Oblivion gate across Tamriel slammed shut. The Daedric invasion was over. Since you might be wondering exactly what Martin Septim did to become the avatar of Akatosh, let me break it down for you. Martin destroys the Amulet of Kings, merging his own blood with Akatosh's blood contained within the amulet, and transforms into Akatosh's avatar. Since Akatosh is known as the Dragon God of Time, he appears in the form of a dragon. Now, this fusion takes a massive amount of energy. So after Dagon's defeat, both the avatar and Martin's body turned to stone. Martin Septim sacrificed himself to save Tamriel, and his heroics later earned him a place in history books and Imperial legends. Some historians even argue that Martin was such a legendary hero, he could rival Tiber Septim himself, who's often considered the greatest Septim Emperor. But here's the thing, Martin, like his brothers, died without an heir. And just like that, the Septim Dynasty, which had ruled for an entire era, came to an end. With the Amulet of Kings gone, the barrier against Oblivion no longer depended on Septim blood. Tamriel's safety didn't need a Septim Empire anymore. Thanks to Akatosh's direct intervention, a permanent barrier was set between Oblivion and Mundus. After the crisis, political change and a new era. With the death of Martin Septim and the end of the Septim bloodline, the Third Era in the Elder Scrolls universe also came to a close. If you remember, the Third Era began with the rise of another Septim, Tiber, who united all of Tamriel and founded the Septim Empire. And now, that same era ended because of another Septim, Martin, who sacrificed himself to save the world. With the end of the Septim bloodline, the tradition of emperors being born of dragonborn lineage also died out, since the Septims carried dragonborn blood. And that change marks the beginning of a new Elder Scrolls prophecy, one that foretells the return of Alduin and the arrival of the last Dragonborn. And that, of course, leads us straight into the events of Skyrim. I just had to share that little lore nugget with you. Back in Cyrodiil, with no heir left to claim the throne, there was no one with a legitimate right to rule. That meant tough times were ahead for the Empire. The Elder Council had to hold things together until a new emperor could be crowned. The wars during the Oblivion Crisis had left deep scars across the continent. Political and cultural unrest broke out in several provinces. Tamriel entered a period of chaos that hadn't been seen since the fall of the Second Empire. And even the rise of the Mede Dynasty in Cyrodiil wasn't enough to bring that chaos to an end. By the way, before we get into the Mede Dynasty, I should mention that the provinces of the Empire started breaking away one by one. Right after the crisis, anti-imperial tension had already begun rising in some parts of Tamriel. And the biggest and most dangerous of these movements happened in the Altmer homeland, Somerset Isles. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Crystal Tower came under siege, and the elves, along with waves of refugees, fell back to it as their final line of defense. A major resistance was mounted there, but in the end, the tower still fell. Just when the elves thought all hope was lost, a miracle happened. The Daedric armies vanished. Now, we know that this was the moment Martin Septim sacrificed himself and banished Mehrunes Dagon from Tamriel. But over in Somerset, things were seen very differently. Many people started to believe that it was the Thalmor who had miraculously saved the elves. The Thalmor used this belief as a powerful propaganda tool and began convincing the people that they were the true saviors. The victory over the Daedra became their claim. Taking advantage of the chaos in the Empire, the now empowered Thalmor staged a violent coup against the Altmer king and queen and overthrew the ruling monarchy. Just like that, Somerset Isles was no longer part of the Empire. The region was renamed the Aldmeri Dominion, and the new Thalmor Council didn't waste any time. Their first act in power was brutal. Anyone not of pure Aldmer blood, along with many political opponents, were executed. The Thalmor made sure to seize every opportunity they could. Now stronger than ever and ruling with an iron fist, the Thalmor set their sights on their cousins, the Wood Elves of Valenwood. At the time, Valenwood was still an imperial province. This marked the Thalmor's first direct takeover of an imperial territory. While the Empire was still wrapped up in succession struggles after the end of the Septim Dynasty, the Thalmor weren't slowing down. Their next target was the Khajiit homeland, the Elsewhere Confederacy. Caught in political strife and instability, Elsewhere fell victim to the Thalmor's manipulative propaganda rooted in superstition. Eventually, they joined the Aldmeri Dominion. Now, the Thalmor had grown into a powerful and diverse force, and the Aldmeri Dominion had become the main threat to the rest of Tamriel. In the east, news that Imperial control in Black Marsh had collapsed sent waves of panic through the Imperial capital. As I mentioned earlier, during the Oblivion Crisis, a group called the Anzilil led the resistance and defended Argonian lands. They gained so much influence and respect among the people that, with what seems to be some behind-the-scenes help from the Thalmor, they launched a coup and declared independence. And just like that, Black Marsh became an independent nation under Anzilil rule. But for the Empire, this was just the beginning of their troubles. The Anzilil's first move was driven by an old grudge. They launched an invasion of Dunmer lands. Southern Morrowind was occupied and fell into Argonian hands. So yeah, the crisis may have ended, but the chaos was just beginning. Right when people thought Morrowind might finally find some peace after the Oblivion Crisis, a massive disaster struck. The Red Year. This happened in the 5th year of the 4th Era. At that time, the last surviving member of Morrowind's tribunal gods, Vivec, suddenly and mysteriously vanished. The thing is, Vivec had been holding back a massive meteor called Bardau that was suspended in the sky over Vardenfell. It had been hovering there for years, thanks to Vivec's power. But after his disappearance, the magic holding the meteor in place started to fade. Eventually, Bardau came crashing down, right into the heart of Vivec City. The impact triggered the eruption of Red Mountain, and the resulting ash and destruction wiped out cities like Balmora, Alderun, Gnesis, and Sadrith Mora. The devastation didn't stop at Vardenfell. Some parts of the mainland were hit with constant earthquakes and flooding caused by the eruption. Countless Dunmer lost their lives or were forced to flee, many of them ending up in Skyrim. And that's why in the Skyrim game we see so many Dunmer refugees. They're the survivors of this catastrophe. After the disaster, Morrowind technically still had a puppet king appointed by the Empire, but real power remained in the hands of the Great Council and the Great Houses. These houses governed by coming together and making decisions through debate and consensus. But that system started to break down after the Argonian invasion. House Redoran, for instance, began trying to establish a new government in the north, and that brought the threat of political unrest. On top of that, with the fall of the Tribunal and the disappearance of Vivec, both the leadership and the people of Morrowind went through a major religious shift. The Dunmer started turning back to the old Daedric gods like Azura and Mephala. So, based on the provinces hit hardest by the Oblivion Crisis, I've tried to paint a political picture of what Tamriel looked like as we entered the 4th Era. As you know, by the time of Skyrim, about 201 years have passed since the Oblivion Crisis. A lot has happened in that time, but I won't go over all of it in this video. If you're curious about those events, feel free to check out my other videos on the channel. In this one, we're focusing on the immediate aftermath of the Oblivion Crisis, the changes that were directly connected to it. And as you can see, independence movements were rising across Tamriel, and some of them even succeeded. A new kind of tension was brewing now, between elves and men. One of the key players in that tension was the Mede Dynasty. So let's dive into that next. The rise to power of the Mede Dynasty. Titus Mede, a Colovian born in Cyrodiil, saw just how weak the empire had become after the crisis. The temporary emperor was barely holding things together, and Titus saw his chance. He began planning to overthrow the current leadership and take control of the throne himself. The empire was in such bad shape that he managed to capture the imperial city with fewer than 1,000 men, and just like that, he declared himself the new emperor. But before he could even properly sit on the throne, another warlord named Eddar Olin launched an attack on the capital, also claiming the throne. Still, Titus was a skilled commander. Using even the weakened Imperial Legion, he managed to repel the attack with a small force. At first, both the people and the Elder Council saw him as just another usurper, but thanks to the efforts of his close friend Yyou've, public opinion started to shift. Over time, Titus went from being seen as a usurper to a savior, and he was eventually accepted by the people of Cyrodiil. His first move as emperor was to strengthen his rule. The empire was fragile, and any rebellion from the provinces could have brought it all crashing down, so he quickly turned his attention to Hammerfell. He personally confronted General Takar, who had been leading a fight for Hammerfell's independence, and managed to win him over as an ally. That brought Hammerfell back under Imperial control. Ironically though, it would later be Titus Mede's own grandson who would cast Hammerfell out of the Empire and leave it to stand on its own. When Titus Mede took the throne, the Empire had shrunk to just Cyrodiil and a handful of provinces from Skyrim. But during his reign, Hammerfell, Morrowind, the rest of Skyrim's provinces, and High Rock all rejoined the Empire. The one place he couldn't touch was the Aldmeri Dominion, Elsewhere, Valenwood, and Somerset Isles, because of their growing power. Plus, during that time, the Thalmor had entered a long period of isolation that lasted about 70 years. The Thalmor would re-emerge later during the reign of his grandson, Titus Mede II. And that's how it all unfolded. The Septim Dynasty came to an end with the Oblivion Crisis, and after a brief power vacuum, the Mede Dynasty rose to take its place. The Oblivion Crisis wasn't just a disaster, it marked the end of an era, and Tamriel was never the same again. Even in Skyrim, you can still see traces of that massive event. The unity, peace, and prosperity that the Septim Dynasty once brought came to a close after the crisis. Tamriel turned into a continent filled with racial tensions, civil wars, and chaos. With the collapse of centralized power, religious culture shifted. In Morrowind, various cults emerged that worshipped different Daedra. Meanwhile in Skyrim, the crisis left behind a deep fear and paranoia, especially toward Daedra, dark magic, and even magic in general. The Vigilants of Stendarr were formed as a direct response to the crisis, with the goal of hunting down Daedra and anyone who worships them. What was left of the mythic Dawn was hunted by various warrior factions and eventually wiped out for good. The Elves, for the third time in history, rose to power and established the Third Aldmeri Dominion. And this time, they reached a level of power unlike anything seen before. I think the events that follow speak for themselves. If Martin Septim hadn't sacrificed himself and Mehrunes Dagon had won, the crisis could have been far more devastating than it already was. We might not even be talking about Tamriel as we know it today. But thankfully, Martin made the ultimate sacrifice and saved Tamriel. And of course, we can't forget the hero of Kvatch, who played a huge role and went on to earn the title of Champion of Cyrodiil, a true legend in Tamriel's history. And that brings us to the end of another video. I've been wanting to talk about the Oblivion Crisis for such a long time, but I kept putting it off because I just didn't have the right footage to work with. But now, Bethesda surprised us all by releasing a remastered version of Oblivion, the game we were all obsessed with 20 years ago. Thanks to that, I was finally able to include proper footage from the game, from the city of Cyrodiil, and from the plains of Oblivion. And honestly, this release is probably going to help tide us over a bit as we continue waiting, impatiently I might add, for Elder Scrolls 6, which still seems a few years away. Before I wrap up, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you've played Oblivion yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these events and how you think the crisis shaped Tamriel. Drop a comment. I'm really looking forward to reading what you have to say. See you in the next video.